This series we've been in is called Following Jesus to the Cross. And that is literally what we've been doing. We've been looking at the events, the stories that took Jesus to the cross. And so we knew as this series was going to come to a conclusion that we were going to get to hardship. We were going to get to the cross itself this morning. This morning, our keepsake is a little pretend crown of thorns to put on your cross to remember that hardship that Jesus endured. As we look this morning at that hardship, as that pain, at that suffering that Jesus went through, there are a couple things we can remember as we look at that journey. One of those is to remember that Jesus did this for us. That we see in Jesus' journey to the cross, we see God's love expressed for us. We see in Jesus' sacrifice for us the full extent of God's love. We're going to focus on that more on Good Friday. But there's something else we see as we look at the hardship that Jesus endures. We see as well that when we go through hardship, Jesus has gone through hardship as well. That when we go through hard times, we're connected because Jesus, God's own Son, is not separated from that, but went through times similar or worse than times we go through. We're connected with Jesus in this way. See, I've been thinking about hardship this week and the various different forms of hardship that we go through, and there are different kinds. Sometimes we go through physical hardship. You know, our bodies age and they have problems and difficulties we do physically oftentimes. There are folks I know who are having surgery coming up. They have this scheduled for something that's breaking down or something that's not working properly in our bodies. There are folks who are recovering from surgery. I had to kind of chuckle. One of the folks who went through a knee replacement here at St. Paul's said, you know, in every action movie, if they really want to hurt a guy, they shoot him in the knee. Now I know why they do that, because that really hurts, the surgery on your knee. There are folks here at St. Paul's right now enduring challenges. I've been asking over the last couple of weeks if we would lift up Curtis Deering in our prayers. Curtis has this very rare autoimmune problem where his body has started attacking itself. He's been on a ventilator the last 2.5 weeks. His body is in great physical hardship. And at different times, all of our bodies go through those same things. Fortunately, not all at once, but few of us escape without some physical hardship along the way. But it's not the only kind of hardship we experience as well. Sometimes we experience mental hardship. Mental hardship. We did a series a couple of years ago on stress, and sometimes we experience anxiety and stress at the different challenges going on in our lives. Sometimes we experience times of depression and struggling. Just this past year, we did the series on resiliency, on bouncing back from those difficult times in life. You know, this is a time of the year where I think about reaching out, and I reach out to some folks that we see a little bit less often at St. Paul's. And as I was reaching out to some of them and praying for some of those folks, I know that it isn't a matter of coming to church. They like church and they like being here. It's a deeper struggle that they have. It isn't a matter of getting to church. It's a matter of getting out of bed or getting out of their homes because they struggle with mental hardship. I know there are folks that even to come into a gathering of folks like this, that they're just kind of uncomfortable being around other folks. They have this mental hardship they go through. One of the worst cases I remember was years ago when I was first studying to be a pastor. I would go to visit this lady named Mabel. And Mabel was so depressed at the loss of her husband that she would just sit in her easy chair and smoke cigarette after cigarette. And at times, she couldn't even get the energy to get up out of her chair and to go to the bathroom. She would go there in her chair. Sometimes we go through times of mental hardship. And blending into that, sometimes we experience emotional hardship. Emotional hardship. You know, when we were kids, they used to say that phrase, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." But it just isn't true. I'll bet the person that invented that phrase never had a parent or a loved one say, "You are stupid and you're never going to amount to anything," again and again and again. Those kind of words stay with you. The person that invented that phrase probably never had someone say, "I've never loved you. I never have." We go through times of mental hardship. I was talking with somebody just the other day, and they were talking about a boss that this person had years ago that used to verbally berate people in front of other employees. And it had been years since they had that boss, and that still stayed with them. That mental hardship, an emotional hardship. And I suppose blending into that sometimes is relational hardship. I know there are folks here in our congregation and here in our community that if they were really honest with themselves, they would say that the person they're with is really not good for them, but better to be with somebody than nobody. I know there are folks here this morning who are wrestling in their relationships, or their relationship has ended, and they're experiencing the relational hardship of that. Or the other side of that you're so in love and your relationship is so good that it's so hard to see somebody go through times of pain. I mentioned earlier Curtis Deering and the physical hardship he's going through. Every time I go to visit his family, and usually his wife is there with him, and I can see it in her eyes that if it was any way she could take away the physical hardship her dear husband is going through, she would, but there's nothing she can do but sit there by his bedside, knowing that he's going through these challenges. And all of these hardships, sometimes the worst of all is spiritual hardship. When our faith is tested, I was having a conversation just with somebody the other day, and we were talking about how is it that in some people's lives, they go through hard times, they go through challenges, and their faith gets stronger, and their relationship with God and their trust in Jesus just goes to a whole new level, and they feel that strength with God. And then somebody else goes through hard times, and they lose their faith and give up on God and Jesus and faith and the whole deal. How is it that one person is strengthened while another person is destroyed? I know there are parents here this morning, and you wonder, how is it that the same kids born in the same household, one child has this deep, strong faith, and the other one, not at all? How does that happen? Raised in the same environment. Why is our faith so different? I know there are some here this morning where you're just not sure there's a God, or there was a Jesus, or church, or faith, or any of it. We go through these times of spiritual hardship. And let me say this again. But when we go through these hard times, we can know that Jesus went through the very same things. We're connected with him. God's own Son knows what it is to go through hardship. And when we see him in hardship, we're connected with him. What I want to do this morning is read the story of the Passion. And you will see all of these hardships in those short period of time that Jesus goes through, each and every one of them. Physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual hardship. So I'm going to read from the Gospel of Matthew, one of the 4 accounts of Jesus' life that very much picks up where we left off last week. So Pilate released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus. Let's stop there for a moment in Jesus' flogging. The Roman soldiers of that day would take bits of metal and bone and would tie them into the strands of the whip so that it would flay the flesh on the body. That's what that flogging, that physical hardship that Jesus went through. He handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him, all the soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. It's worth noting that last week we looked at how 2 of the Gospels record that as a purple robe, 2 of them as a scarlet robe, maybe one of those colors in the middle or the details, not quite clear. And after twisting some thorns into a crown, we talked last week about how the crown is a symbol of royalty, but this is a crown of pain, of thorns. You know how when you get a cut in your head, it bleeds so rapidly because how vascular it is? Well, the blood must have poured down from Jesus' head from this crown of thorns that they put on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. So it isn't just the physical hardship he's going through, but the mental and the emotional hardship that Jesus was in. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. And they compelled this man to carry his cross. The tradition of the day was that a condemned man had to carry his own cross, but clearly Jesus is so wounded and in such physical hardship at this point that he needs help to carry the cross to the place of crucifixion. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, aptly named, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. Again, the custom of the Roman soldiers was to mix in a painkiller. They're not quite sure whether this was an act of mercy or perhaps it actually extended the suffering and the pain, extended the time of crucifixion. Whatever the reason, Jesus chooses to go without any painkiller at all to the cross. And when they crucified him, just a few simple words in the scripture, but so much wrapped up in this. I remember a number of years ago when the movie The Passion of the Christ came out. One of the moments in that movie that moved me the most is every other movie version that I'd ever seen of the crucifixion had them put a nail at Jesus' hand or his wrist, and you'd see a hammer lifted up, and then maybe you'd just hear the sound, or you'd see the face of Jesus or someone else watching. But in that movie, you saw the nail pierce the flesh, and our hands have so many nerve endings, all of them on fire, as Jesus is hung and then suspended from the cross. Usually there was a little step or the feet were nailed to the cross as well, because you cannot hang long term from your arms. You suffocate almost immediately. A couple of years ago, I was demonstrating to our teens what the crucifixion was like, and downstairs in our fellowship hall, I attached 2 handles to the beams and asked the teens to see how long they could last. I think my son Joshua was the longest, and he went about 1.5 minutes before he had to let go. And Jesus was there hours on the cross. And he divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots. For him to watch that, again, the mental and emotional hardship, to know that he won't need these things ever again. Then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then the 2 bandits were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." And we think about that continuing mental and emotional and relational hardship. In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to. For he said, 'I am God's son.'" The bandits who were crucified with him also taunted him. Even those suffering beside him taunted him in the same way. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. We don't know if this was an eclipse or whether the clouds just covered the sun, mirroring the mood of those moments. About 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Here is the spiritual hardship. We do not know what took place in that moment. Was it that Jesus felt that God had abandoned him? God would never abandon him, never abandons us, but it doesn't mean that we don't feel sometimes like God has abandoned us. Is that what Jesus just feels, that God has left him? Or is there some deeper, more mysterious event taking place? Some have pointed out, is it at this moment that all the sin before Jesus, all the sin of that day, and all the sin that would come is piled on Jesus, that he feels God has forsaken him? Whatever it was, Jesus experiences spiritual hardship. And when some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "This man is calling for Elijah." At once, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." Then Jesus cried out with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, not like a human being would tear it from the bottom to the top, but from the top to the bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs also were open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, yet a promise. They came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, "Truly this man was God's son." Many women were there also, looking on from a distance. There, that relational hardship that Jesus would have seen in their eyes, the pain in their eyes, seeing their Lord dying. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and had provided for him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. And some Gospels record that Jesus' own mother was there to see this as well. Again, when we go through hardship, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, relational, or spiritual hardship, we know that Jesus, God's own Son, went through these things as well. that he connects with us, that he knows our pain, and we partner with him in the midst of these things as we are soon ending Jesus' journey to the cross.